Welcome, welcome. I am Dr. Patrice Berry. I'm a licensed clinical psychologist, and you all asked for me to cover this case. I've been getting some questions on this case, and so I'm going to be answering your questions. Please know that this video, I'm going to have an educational component, and so we are going to talk about how the situation could have been handled different that when there are issues like this, especially with adoptive children, as a licensed psychologist that's also an adoption competent therapist, just how, if I was working with this family, what would I have recommended? How would I have supported them? I'm going to give y'all some tips like this. A bit of a spoiler alert. So the jury has already come back, and I do agree with the jury on this one. I'm glad that they weren't distracted by any of those things. I'm going to just give that content warning. So, this is a difficult case. And if you're on the replay crew, I'm going to have some timestamps in here because I'm going to start out with the video testimony. So, I'm going to start out with the opening statements from the prosecution and defense. And then we're going to move into the victim in this case to his testimony. And then his sister's testimony, I think, was even more powerful than his testimony, and so I'm going to cover the sister's testimony as well. And then I'm going to take a break. So then we're going to talk about and all throughout, I'm going to include some things, but I'm really going to provide some resources and some just before we get into the expert testimony, because yeah, so we are going to cover the expert testimony as well, and then just finish everything off with some additional resources. And as we go, if you all have questions, please just put those in the chat and let's dive right into this video. This is the opening statement from the prosecution. And I've already given y'all all the trigger warnings. So this case is very difficult. It involves isolation, some like physical and verbal aggression, if not more than that. And so let's listen to this.
Over the course of this week, you're going to hear a lot and get to know a lot about the life of he goes by, and today he is 16 years old. But this case starts, and really the focus of what his life was like is how his life was in end of December 2021 and January of 2022 when he was just 14 years old. This morning, you're going to learn that on January 28th, 2022, he ran away from home. He lived in Jupiter, Florida at that time with his parents, the defendant, Tim Ferriter, and his mom, Tracy Ferriter. You're going to hear that he was adopted as a child, as a small child, a toddler age from Vietnam, and he had lived with the Ferriters since that time. He was the second of their 4 children. He has an older sister named, who you're also going to get to hear from at this during this trial, a younger sister named, and a much younger little brother named, who was about 3 years old when all of this happened.
And the 2 oldest, so the sister and the victim in this case, they are both adopted. And then the 2 other children are the Ferriter's biological children.
And in January of 2022, he was a student at Independence Middle School and 14 years old. You're going to hear on the 28th, he ran away from home. He was reported missing to the Jupiter Police Department, and that's where this case starts. You're going to hear from Jupiter Police Department officers who are going to tell you that they took the report of a missing child and that he didn't come home on the next day on the 29th. And he also...
So I am going to interrupt things at times to just pull up things that are in the chat. So the defense wanted to bring up the fact that this child is still struggling and is still having a lot of emotional difficulties. And I want to start with the fact that I've worked with cases like this where I'm working with the individual that because they told or because they ran away, the entire family ends up in foster care or they end up removed. That individual carries a weight that is unimaginable. Okay. What happened to him was not okay. and he might feel like he deserved the way he was treated, which nobody, no person, no child, no dog, like no one should be treated the way this child was treated. I am incredibly passionate about that, and so I um because the defense is going to, and I don't know how much of it I'm going to play. I'm going to try to play up to the part where they try to call this bad parenting, and that might be all that I can tolerate, because the defense tries to make this about the fact that he had issues. And even if he did, so yes, sure, he had some behavioral issues. Nothing anyone could do. So the juvenile court system could not do what they did. Like no one would be able, like this was clearly harmful to this child, and so I want to start there. And I do hope that he receives help, that he receives support. And that's why I think the sister's testimony was so powerful, because she saw that he was treated differently. She saw what was happening, and throughout her entire testimony she calls her adoptive parents Tim, and y'all know me in names. I knew the wife's name before this, but she calls them Tracy. She calls them Tim and Tracy. And normally, a 17-year-old adoptive child, they would call them mom, because she was treated reasonably well by them, so she was not the target of Tim's anger. And but this child was, and she witnessed that, and everybody in the family knew that he was being treated different. And sadly, I think there might be a part of this child that thinks that he deserved it, and he did not. Okay, let's keep going.
So still was not located on the 30th. They went back to the Ferriter residence to find out if there was new information. Had he come home? Was there any leads? The day he left was a Friday, still wasn't there on Saturday. And on Sunday, Detective Sharp from the Jupiter Police Department went into the Ferriter home with Tracy Ferriter. You're going to hear it's at that point that for the very first time, he learned about how he was living, about what his living situation was like at home with his parents. He's going to tell you that he was shown the house, and the first thing that stood out to him was that the child who they were looking for.
Y'all know I'm going to pause it because the chat is always on point. And yes, so this all started, and I have some speculation about this. I don't know what happened. This started when Tracy became pregnant with Pierce. With the youngest. I'm sorry for using his name. I might try. So when Tracy became pregnant with the youngest child, that was when they made this room for him, and he from what I heard, he stopped receiving all the treatment and help and support. And this is when they had their birth son, that their biological son, that they made this, because when they moved to Arizona, he wasn't kept that way. This did not happen until about 4 years ago, when right before, I believe, Tracy had their youngest. And so let's keep it going.
Didn't have a place to sleep in the main house. There wasn't a bedroom for him. There weren't his items of clothes. There weren't his toys inside of the house. Instead, there was a structure, a small room box-like structure that was constructed in the garage that didn't have any windows. It had a box spring and a mattress, a bucket in the corner, and a desk. You're going to hear that at that point, the child still wasn't found, and so Detective Sharp left and continued the investigation. And the next day, which is Monday, January 31st, shows up at his school. And there he is made secure, made safe by the Jupiter Police Department. And that's when the criminal investigation really starts, after they had the opportunity to speak to him. You're going to hear that as part of the investigation, during that initial walkthrough of the room, Detective Sharp realized that that small cell-like room had a ring camera in the corner to observe the occupant of the room. And so, as part of his investigation, he served a search warrant to the Ring Corporation to see if they had maintained any videos. And you're going to.
And so every person deserves a defense. And so I don't have anything against the defense lawyer. In cases like these, I tend to trend more toward the child anyway. Like that's just my natural, unless I'm assessing or evaluating the parent. And I have to keep that kind of neutral, which is why I mentioned before, if I evaluate the parent, I don't meet the child. I don't do forensic evaluations. I just do general psych evals sometimes for Department of Social Services in my area. And so uh the defense lawyer, so they had the video, they had the room, everything. He clearly did it. And so they were trying to see how they could possibly get Tim off. It'll be interesting to see what happens with Tracy. So I don't know if Tracy is going to say Tim, I don't know if Tracy is going to blame Tim. And I think the same lawyer is going to be defending Tracy as well. This is a family that had resources and means. Not that a family that didn't have it should be, but like the fact that he wasn't in therapy, the fact that he wasn't, if he did need medication or something, the fact that he wasn't in any type of treatment, and yet these behaviors were so severe that they were locking him in a room for between 10 to 14 hours a day. That is not okay. Not at all okay.
Going to get the opportunity to see and hear that evidence that was returned from the Ring Corporation, because that Ring camera captured moment after moment of life in that room. You're going to hear over and over and over again that door locking and unlocking, because the evidence is going to show that that room was not a room that could come and go from as he pleased. He was locked inside from the outside over and over again. You're also going to see that he did not have the ability to control things like the lights in that room, that the only way that those lights could be controlled was outside the room. And so you're going to see him sitting in the dark in a windowless room for hours at a time. And we're not just talking from 10 p.m. till 7 o'clock in the morning overnight. You're going to see that even during the day, there are times in which his parents, the defendant and his wife, would turn off that light and leave their 14-year-old son locked in a room in the dark, alone, isolated. You're also going to get to observe and hear the anger and the derision, the physical altercations that this defendant has with his child on the Ring camera, physical intimidation and the threats of violence. You're also going to see having to use that bucket, having to pee in the bucket, because for hours overnight, he did not have access or the opportunity to go to the bathroom. And the only option for him was to pee in the bucket. And then you're going to see the next morning when that occurred, that this defendant would tell him, clean out the bucket, make sure the neighbors don't see you doing that. Because this treatment, his life,
As though, and to tell him to make sure the neighbors don't see it, like that, to me, that adds a layer of shame to it. And I've seen families, especially families of adopted children, try to do things where like you earn your room or act like you want to be in this family, or and to say and do those things to a child whose birth family did make the choice, or somehow he ended up at the being adopted. For a child that already has that attachment trauma, that immediately adds additional trauma. Immediately. Okay. And this was his normal. So this is all this individual knows. And I did watch. So Dr. G explains here on YouTube earlier today, because he covered Timothy Ferriter's body language and covered how controlled he is, and just how like he showed no emotion. He really didn't show any remorse. He presented to me. So for me watching, he presented as though what he did was justified and okay. And he didn't seem at all like, so the jury is watching and hearing videos and hearing testimony that is heart-wrenching. Who would do this to their child? And he's just as like tall as he can be, like his hair, every hair perfectly, like just like he's just like that. And you really don't see much of a reaction. Dr. G did mention that while the victim in this case was testifying, he saw like a lot of blinking. Like it seemed like it took more for him to control just his emotions. He still controlled it, but it just seemed like it took more. Thank y'all to everyone watching. Make sure to hit that like, subscribe, all that, do all the YouTubey things. All right, let's keep going.
Was kind of a secret thing. And you're going to hear that it's not the state's case and it's not the evidence in this case that he was kept in there 24 hours a day. He went to school. There were times where he was outside of the room with his family. There was times where he was shoveling shells for his father for hours at a time. But for long periods of time, for mass majority of this child's life in that period in Jupiter, Florida, he's in that room, isolated, alone, without autonomy, without privacy, without stimulation, sometimes with only a single book to read over and over again. As part of the evidence in this case, you're going to hear that the defendants are charged with that 4-week period, that 4 to 6 week period, because the family moved to Jupiter, Florida in December of 2021, mid-December, kind of a week or two before Christmas. And this all happens at the end of January. So we're talking about 6 weeks when they are in Palm Beach County, Florida. And so that's the charged time period. That's the criminal conduct that we're talking about. But the state expects that you're going to hear evidence about Ronan's life before the family moved to Florida, when they lived in Arizona. We expect that you're going to hear testimony about a very similar, nearly identical room that the family constructed for him in Arizona, in which he had been residing in since he was 11 years old.
I chose Wix for my business because of its massive scope for function.
Commercials.
Creation.
You're going to hear that room had no access to a bathroom, no control of the lights, no freedom of movement, that he was recorded, and that he was locked in from the outside with only a bucket to go to the bathroom. The charges in this case are aggravated child abuse, child neglect, and false imprisonment. And at the end of this trial, Judge Coates is going to read you instructions about what the law is for child abuse in the state of Florida. And you're going to hear that there's child abuse and there's aggravated child abuse. Aggravated child abuse.
All right, so I'm going to fast forward past this part and get to the defense opening.
Please, defense ready for an opening. Ms. Murad, you're going to handle it? You may proceed.
At 1:30 p.m.
It is a parent's responsibility to make tough choices. Tough choices to protect their child, tough choices to protect their other children, and tough choices to protect the community. And that is what Tim Ferriter did. He was.
I'm going to do my best to listen. Okay. But my face is going to say it all. Okay. But she's like I said, no hate. This was the only defense I think they could have had, because there was the Ring camera footage and there was so much evidence in this case. They had to turn it into, this child had so many issues. This family ran out of options, and this was their only option to keep everybody else safe. And it would have been different if So we'll hear from the sister a little bit later. If the sister had talked about being terrified of him, if the sister had talked about, like, I think one time he like embarrassed a sister at school or something. So the things that they complained about, I hear much worse in my office on a regular basis. So the issues that they were describing with him, I would say were mild to moderate. The issues that I see in my office sometimes is moderate to severe. I've worked with cases that were very, very severe. There were very real safety issues, safety concerns. I worked with one situation where there was concern about safety at night, and so what we did was we put a bell on the outside of one person's door, and that was how we kind of maintained safety. Like, it's just, but I'm gonna let her talk. I'm gonna let her talk.
He was faced with an impossible situation. And he made tough choices to protect what we will call him throughout this trial from himself, from the other children in his home, and from the community. You only have to make one determination in this case, and that is whether or not Tim Ferriter had the criminal intent necessary. That's it. Did he or did he not have the criminal intent? And that will be your guiding question throughout.
So I do think, I don't, okay, so this is going to be a hard one. Okay. So I do think that, I think the father would describe himself as loving his children. I think that's how he would describe it. That love, I don't want it. If that's what love is, oh no. Like you can keep all of that, because that is not the way that you communicate love to any person, to any individual, yet less an adopted child. Okay? So with adoption, there's already the adoption trauma, and then you add all of this trauma on top of it, where Tim is basically telling this child, you are so broken, you're so messed up. Like, I have to literally lock you in a room to keep everybody else safe from you. You're such a monster. And I don't think, like, I think the kid had some struggles. He might still have some struggles, but this treatment creates trauma. Okay? Like, that's just what this does.
Throughout this case. This case is not about whether or not Tim Ferriter made the right choice, because I will be the first to tell you, the defense will be the first to tell you that he did not. But what it is about is the difficulty of parenting, right? Because bad parenting does not make somebody a criminal. Bad parenting does not mean that a person should be charged with a crime. It makes them human. It makes them a parent who is trying to figure out, when faced with a child, as you'll hear throughout the trial, who has consistent and escalating behavioral issues, how to handle them. You will learn more throughout the trial.
And so that's about all that I can tolerate from that one. So what you do not do in situations like this is increase your control. So every child wants control. Every child. I've been letting my kiddo pick out what he wears to school since he was like 2 years old. Now, what I do is, like, so this past week, it's been a little bit colder here in Virginia. So sometimes I'll tell him, you have 5 pairs of pants. You can pick any pair of pants, but today isn't a shorts day. Like, just as his parent, he's young enough to say, you need to wear pants today. No problem. But you couldn't do this to adults in like military. I don't like, this is not okay. This is not okay. It's not okay. For more, so next we are going to hear from the individual directly. Well, let's try to not use names of the children in the chat, because just for their future. I could see this individual possibly changing their name. I work with a bunch of adopted kids that change their name once they become 18. Not a bunch. So I've had a few that have changed their legal name, because so adoption takes away control from the child. Do you know the person that has the least amount of control in adoption? The child. The child doesn't get to pick. I've worked with individuals that um, they were too young to remain in foster care, and they really, but the state told them, you have to be adopted. So if you're going to be adopted, is it okay to be adopted by this individual? And they're like, okay. And I've worked with cases where we've talked about the fact, okay, this child has these needs, and I've made a treatment recommendation at this point in this child's life. They should not be in a home with other children. And it wasn't, it was just when they're around other children, it becomes a competitive thing. And the child really, they needed to be the only source of of attention, that this child had high needs, and they wouldn't do well in a home with other kids, because sometimes that meant separating siblings. And the child was like telling me that this is what they wanted. And so I've worked cases like that, and just a variety of things. In these cases, it is normal for any child to want some level of control, but that's when the parents try to set appropriate, and that's where you pick and choose. So you don't fight battles over over small things. You just don't. And it seems like they they didn't let little things go. And this kid could do nothing right, or very little right. That it was just constantly him doing things wrong. Like that's the portrayal that I was getting. All right, so let's go on ahead and see the child in the case. So they're not going to show him. You're just going to hear some of his testimony. You're going to hear him describe what it was like to be in the box. And I'll just play a little bit of this, and then we'll move to his sister's testimony, and we'll keep going.
And so when you moved to Florida the second time, you're in the middle of 8th grade. How old were you? It was about 14 years old. Seem right?
Yes.
Now, when you moved back to Florida, what time of year was that?
Somewhere in December.
Okay. So somewhere in December of the middle of your 8th grade year.
When I moved to Florida?
When you moved to Florida the second time.
Yes.
And where in Florida, like which town did you move to?
Just commenting about the fact that they had really good victim advocates in this case, because sometimes for a child to not have to testify in front of the defendant, they have to jump through a bunch of hoops. I've worked with people on a variety of cases, and the fact that they weren't in the room. So the sister testified through, I think, closed circuit TV, and I guess I saw Phoenix mention that the victim in this case also testified through, he wasn't in the actual courtroom.
I moved to Jupiter.
And is that where your family's house was, in Jupiter?
Yes.
And so did your whole family move with you?
Yes.
And what school did you start at?
I started at Independence Middle School.
Is that a school in Jupiter?
It's a school in Jupiter.
Was it close to your house?
Yes.
All right. So for anybody that so I have the links to the full videos down below for people that don't, but y'all are here for my interruptions. Okay. Y'all are here for my thoughts. Somebody in the comments later will get upset about it. It's okay. So there is no aftercare. So with foster care, there is follow-up. There is like a caseworker that checks in from time to time. Any follow-up post-adoption. And so it depends on the country, because you mentioned having 2 Ukrainian refugees that stayed, and they had regular check-in. But with adoption, there is this, you are now the legal person. You are now the person that's able to make the decisions. You are the one that's able to decide everything. Okay. And so I don't know. I thought, but I don't. So I don't know if he was in the courtroom or if he wasn't. If he was able to testify in the courtroom, they often want that to happen if it can, because it tends to be more powerful if it can happen. The video, they didn't show him at all, so I don't. I'm not aware if he was physically there. But there is no aftercare. There are some adoption agencies that might check in, but there's not even anything. So like I've had some individuals, so there have been situations. So in foster care, you can't use certain types of discipline with a foster child. But once that individual is your legal child, like once you are legally the adoptive parent, nobody says what you can and can't do, except I'm the therapist that does. So I'm the therapist that will put in writing and say, if you do this, this is harm. And then sometimes I get fired, and sometimes, but not normally. When they're coming to me, they truly want help. And normally, if they try it my way, you get better long-term results. They have a better connection with the child. And I'm not one to just say, let kids do whatever, like just let people rip and run. No, I'm not like that. It's just when there's trauma. So behaviors show us that something's wrong. So kids often don't say that they're not okay. We know they're not okay based on their behaviors, and trying to control more for an individual that's desperately trying to find some sense of control, that can just make things way worse. I have some stories to share a little bit later. Let's hear a little bit of this.
Now, I want to talk about kind of how your family was run with Tim and Tracy, the defendants. Who was the person in your family who was in charge of setting the rules?
Tim.
Okay. Who was the person in your family that was in charge of deciding kind of what kind of punishment you would get?
Tim.
And who was the one that kind of decided how you would be treated, the person in charge?
Tim.
Now, did Tracy also go along with and support what Tim did?
Yes.
Was it an option for you if you disagreed with a rule, or if you wanted to discuss the way you were being treated? Was that something that you could have a discussion with the defendant, Tim?
No.
Now, talk to me about when you moved to Florida. What was the house like?
The house, when I moved back to Florida in 2021.
Yes, December 2021.
Yes.
Yeah. How was the house like?
So the house had a 2-car garage. It had 3 bedrooms, 1 office, and 2 bathrooms. And we also had 2 living rooms and a backyard.
You're on a Carnival cruise at Amber Cove. 3 generations of Clifton standing.
Tell us who had the bedrooms? Who had what bedroom?
I had a bedroom. I had a bedroom and had the office as a room. And Tim and Tracy had a room together.
Okay. I want to talk to you for a second about something that's already been entered into evidence, and see if you recognize, or we can talk about some of these photographs, okay?
Okay.
Permission to approach, Your Honor, what's already been entered into evidence as states 3A through C.
Granted.
Okay, so I'm showing you, this is already in evidence. The jury's already seen it. States 3A through C. Do you recognize what room we're looking at?
Okay, good. I think I'm unmuted. So there are some good questions, and I would not stand by my partner and allow him to do this to our pet bunny, or so sometimes I have to get to laugh a little to keep, because it should be common sense that you don't do this to a child like that. That should be common sense. Now, granted, Tim could have his own history of trauma, and maybe what he's doing isn't as bad as so this reminds me of some military, particularly Marines. I hate their name, but I'm not saying that as but I've worked with some parents I accept TRICARE. I work with military families, and sometimes some people brought the military home, and we had to talk about, yes, you're a drill sergeant at work, but like you have to be a parent at home, and we had to talk about, just normal kid behavior, and we had to kind of do those things. Um, Florida's pretty south. I do believe that they do allow for that. But this type of treatment causes harm. And also, because they have the clear evidence. And also they what they're charging him for, like the neglect and everything, it wasn't as much the physical stuff. So that was included, the yelling, screaming. I think he like the sister described him grabbing him by the back of the neck. And we don't have in Florida, there wasn't any hitting, punching, slapping. There wasn't anything like that in Florida. They would restrict food. They would do all of, lock him in the room for long periods of time. All of those things go above and beyond uh, appropriate parenting. And I think the Florida law, and that's what the jury found as well. All right. And so let's keep listening to the testimony. Oh, sorry. I played the wrong one. Here we go. Here's the right one.
Yes,
Which room is that?
it is his room.
Okay. Now, in these pictures, there's like some mattresses on the floor in his room. Is that what it was
Sorry about the sound. She stepped away from the mic. Okay.
like when you were living there?
No.
Were those mattresses on there?
No.
In the floor? Do you know where those mattresses were?
That mattress was in either, if it's an inflatable mattress, it was in storage.
I'm going to fast forward just a little bit. All right.
Is that something that you could do when you were inside the room?
No.
Did you have any control over when the lights were on or when the lights were off? Who controlled that?
My parents, Tim or Tracy.
Okay. Were there times that you were in the room in the dark?
Yes.
Is that at night sometimes?
Yes, and also during the day.
Okay. So there were periods of time during the day where you would be there in the dark, in the room.
Yes.
What was it like in the room when the lights were off?
It was pitch black. You couldn't see anything.
Would you have to feel your way around to
Yes.
see what's going on? Now, did the room have a bathroom or access to the bathroom?
It had a bucket for my urine and feces, but that was basically it.
Okay. So if you were in the room and you were closed in there and you had to use the bathroom, what was your only option?
Use the bucket.
Now, I want to talk about the time frame in Florida. While you were in there, were there times where you were locked in the room, unable to leave, and had to use the bathroom?
Yes.
And did you use the bucket in the corner of the room in order to relieve yourself?
Yes.
Now, in Florida, did you ever have to use that bucket for feces?
No.
But did you have to use it to urinate?
Yes.
What about previously? We'll talk about it a little bit more depth. When you were in Arizona, did you ever have to use the bucket for Arizona for feces?
Yes.
Did you have to use it for urine?
Yes.
Because you had to urinate in the room on occasion. How did the room smell?
All right. And so this one was too good to just let it keep going. So often adoptees, no matter how they're treated, no matter what happens, sometimes they're made to have this sense of gratitude, to always be grateful, but never acknowledging their trauma of what they lost. He lost a country. So he was born in Vietnam. Sometimes the families want the child to have a better, so sometimes like it can be a positive thing. There's a lot of money involved in adoption. Like adoption is pretty much like legal. So, yeah, like so the way that adoptees describe it sometimes is that I can't that it can feel like human trafficking sometimes. Now, adoption is not a cure for being unable to have a child, and because the parent has to cope and manage those emotions. Some people get into adoption because they feel like they're called to it, because they feel like they have love, this abundance of love, and they want to give it. I'm Dr. Barry, licensed psychologist, adoption competent therapist, to tell y'all that adoption, so love is not enough. You need more than just love. Okay? A home can have a ton of love, but if the parent is not capable of managing these behaviors in a trauma and adoption and an attachment informed way, they can cause more harm. Okay? Now, the conditions that he lived in the because I think he came to the orphanage maybe when he was, because it doesn't sound like he was there from birth. Like by the time he was there, it sounds like there was significant neglect. There were a lot of issues that happened. There's not a lot that's known about his early childhood, and there are other ways to, so what they did could, to me, in my opinion, added to his adoption trauma. Okay. Because not only am I coping with what happened in the past, I'm coping about what is happening in my present. Okay. So let's keep going.
Smell it all?
Yes.
How did it smell?
Uh,
I mean, was
Correct.
it bad?
Putrid. Yes.
Now, I want to talk about whether or not, was there a camera in the room?
Yes.
And what was your understanding of what was happening with the camera?
So the camera was a Ring camera. It had two-way communication, but the communication from the person viewing the camera to the person that is being supervised by the camera was separated by the click of a button on the phone or any device you can to watch the video.
So the person outside the room watching on the Ring camera could talk to you inside the room?
Yes, by the click of a button.
So they would have to click on something in order to hear them. And they could also potentially hear what you would say.
Yes.
Were there times that the defendants in this case, Tim and Tracy Ferriter, were there times that they spoke to you only through the camera?
Yes.
You probably know Vistaprint for business cards, but did you know we also print that? And that.
Oopsie, oops, no.
Yes, I did.
Sorry. Okay, so I'm gonna have to go back to find where I was. So I'm going to go ahead and go to the sister's testimony because he has described what it was like to be in the room. And there were some issues with, okay, let's talk about what the defense did. And okay, let's just talk about it. So on the verdict day, so the jury is given all the exhibits, and the judge has ruled that the defense, that they can't show the video of the child being arrested, or the child in handcuffs, not arrested. So when they apprehend a runaway, like when they find a runaway, sometimes to transport a child in the car, the officer takes emergency custody to be able to take the child in the car without the parent's permission, and they often have to be handcuffed. I know that's how it is in Virginia. The child has to be handcuffed to be transported in the car. Well, the defense had two versions of the video, and both versions were given to the jury. Of the edited one that was allowed to be presented, and then the longer version that the judge said was not allowed. So the judge gave the defense a stern talking to because the prosecution didn't want it to look like the child was being arrested or like the child had done something wrong. And I think it was even labeled incorrectly as well. And it was also interesting to find out. So y'all know I'm not a lawyer, okay? So that with this case, that the prosecution can't declare a mistrial because the prosecution, because of double jeopardy, if the prosecution said, some egregious things happened. We want to retry this case. So the defense is the only one that's able to call for a mistrial. That's what I saw in one of the things. Thank you for adding this. He was adopted from Vietnam at 17 months. And somebody else agreed that some of the videos. So we are not going to play. So the videos are extremely. So the audio recordings of how these individuals talk to this child, it was alarming. Like, so the parent is, I hate to say, so Tim is cursing, calling him all kinds of names, and that came out in a little bit more of the child's testimony as well. But let's go on ahead and listen to the sister. So the jury asked to hear the sister's testimony again, and they brought them back into the courtroom. And for some reason, like, they played it this way, but this is what happened. So let's play this part.
My parents.
And this is the sister. So this is she's now 17 years old, and she's being asked questions by the prosecution.
Okay, so Tim and Tracy had that room specifically built into the garage? Correct. Is that room already there by the time you moved? I don't remember. Okay. But was it there at the very least shortly thereafter? I saw it, at least. And when we say that it's in the garage, was everyone else's room in the main house? Correct, yes. And Ronan was the only one that had to stay in the garage? Yes. Now, I wanted to show you what has already been marked as evidence and shown to the jury. There's some pictures of your home. Okay. And so I want to see if you recognize any of them. You mentioned that you had a bedroom. I'm showing you what's been pre-marked as evidence as states 7A and F. Just take a look at it and tell me if you recognize whose room that is. Yeah, that's my room. And now I'm going to show you what's been marked as evidence as states.
And I'm guessing everyone else's rooms looked a lot nicer. Everyone else's rooms had a bunch of stuff in it. And then I'm guessing that the victim in this case, their room was probably pretty bare. And there were times that the victim in this case would get upset and pull things down off his room, or that I think there was a time that I think he cut up his clothes or something. And but I think the way that the parents respond to that, by removing all of his clothes, by removing everything, so they are not publicly saying where the kids are now. They are not with the parent. They are not with Tim and Tracy. So they have been removed from Tim and Tracy's care, and they have not said where, just out of protect. I think two of them might be together, and I'm guessing probably the birth children. Often in cases like this, they would want an appropriate family member to step up. Sometimes kids end up in foster care. So with the Hildebrandt and Jody Hildebrandt and the case out in Utah, probably Utah, that Frankie, Ruby Frankie, those kids, they are all in foster care. Just there's too much involvement, like they're investigating too much. In that case, they are not allowing the children to be with a family member, to my knowledge. So it's my understanding that the kids are in custody still. And sometimes a person can stay in custody, but a family member be able to apply to be a foster parent. But yes. I love y'all's questions. What is your thought on the victim giving? I think, okay, so Special K, tell me if it was the younger sister. Was it the sister that's like a year younger than him? And also in this case, everyone else was loved in a way that this child desperately wanted to be. And so I could see him probably messing with him possibly doing things that agitated the parents. So negative attention is attention. And kids desperately need attention. Like, it's normal for kids to need attention. And in cases like this, I've seen so I didn't see what I would want to see, like love and care. I see a lot of contempt for this child out of Tim, and I don't know him. I'm guessing, this is my hypothesis. I heard a lot of anger in his voice and disgust. I did not hear what I would expect to be love. So I recently met one of the most difficult cases that I've worked with in a while. And there was a lot of disrespect. There was a lot of things going on. And what I did in that case was I ignored it. I ignored it. And guess what? Under all of that behavior, there was a whole lot of emotion and trauma that, and by ignoring the behavior and just tell me what happened, what's going on, how can I help? By just not reacting. So as the adult, I always have to be bigger, stronger. I'm the one with the fully regulated, like with the brain, like with the fully developed brain. Kids don't have fully developed brains. And so the fact that these adults are allowing the child, and they're allowing the child to see. So I've worked with some kids that clearly enjoyed triggering their parents, clearly enjoyed it. What I did is I would work with those parents on how they could be less triggered, because the child is looking for a reaction. And right now they're only getting that reaction when they do something bad. And so if I can work with the parent on their reaction. So if I was working with this family, like 60 to 80% of the work would be with the parents, or it would be with the family altogether. I would not be looking at that child saying you are the problem. This was a system problem. This was not, I do not see this as a problem with that one child. This child, and family system talk, this child was the scapegoat. The scapegoat is the one who can do no right. And so we're going to get to it, I hope. But the sister talks about the fact that she could do the exact same thing he did, and she wouldn't be punished the way he was. There was something where this child was treated different. And maybe he couldn't give the love back the way that the parents wanted it. So I've seen that happen as well, where the adults withhold the love because the child isn't affectionate, because the child does, and I don't know this, like I don't know that that's true in this case. But that's something that I've seen. Let's keep listening.
5A through D is another diagram. So what diagram is that?
That would be Nola's.
And then I'm going to
So
show
I think they
you-
didn't cut out some of the names on this one.
Now, you said that you saw Ty, through your time in Florida, or Ronan, get punished. Did you ever see him get punished for little things?
Yes.
Like what?
For me, it'd be just not answering questions. Maybe he plays a little too rough with one of us, or he talks back.
When you say he wasn't answering questions, what do you mean?
Let's say he did something wrong and they asked him about it. He wouldn't say anything. He just wouldn't answer them.
And then what would be the response to that?
If he didn't answer them to a certain point, he'd be sent to his room. Or if he did answer, he'd still be sent to his room.
When he's sent to his room, is he then allowed to leave?
No.
Is he locked in there?
Yes, he did leave. I don't know if he was locked all the time, but I know he wasn't allowed to leave.
Did you see both Tim and Tracy force him into the room? Make him go into the room?
I've heard both of them tell him to go to his room.
And did you see both Tim and Tracy involved in the punishment and discipline?
Can you be more specific?
Well, there's some things that one person did or the other person did, but were they both?
They were both involved with the punishment.
Now, over time, growing up with your brother, did you notice him become less communicative?
Yes, he shut down.
Okay. Did you notice him over time, especially toward the end, become more withdrawn?
Yes.
Did he smile less?
Yes, definitely.
And that's something you noticed kind of as his sibling?
Yes.
Now I want to talk about specifically right now the time in Florida. What was your observation about kind of how often he was in the room? How often he was in the room? Yeah, did you see him around the house very often? Not inside the house. No. More so outside. Okay. Tell me about that. What would he be doing outside? Yard work, moving the outdoor furniture. So when he's outside, is it like that he has an opportunity to freely play? No, it's not. It's not for entertainment. Okay. What kind of yard work is he doing? At the time we were moving in, so it was mostly moving supplies outside the house. Okay. Was there some yard work or landscaping involving shelves that he was required to do? Yes. Okay. Is that something that you were required to do? No. And did you see him doing that? Yes, I did see him moving shelves. And you said that you would observe him outside when he.
Okay, so I heard someone mention that it's hard to hear and closed captions is not available. And so I will leave this one. Please just trust me when I say the sister's testimony. It is powerful. And she pretty much talks about being treated differently than her siblings, and not than the sister talks about being treated differently than the victim in this case. I told y'all about part of the way through, I wanted to talk about adoption. So I am an adoption competent therapist. And what that means is I took 66 hours. So it was 66 credit hours of additional training on various topics, transracial adoption. So this was a transracial adoption, transcultural. So the fact that this is a family that I've sometimes worked with adoptees that they're struggling in 11 and 12 is very common age for adoptees to start struggling with behaviors. And he likely clearly looks different. So there are some adoptive families where they have to disclose that a child is adopted because they kind of look like the other family members. With a transcultural or transracial adoption, the child clearly looks different, and they're clearly adopted. And sometimes there are peers at school that can say horrible things. There are things that can happen. And as an adoption competent therapist, I try to have the family connect that child with their culture, connect them with their identity. And they're going to have, like, because he was adopted so young, he likely he doesn't. And so sometimes even if you give them the option of, would you like to learn your home language, or would you like to do these things? Because sometimes what I've seen um with adoptive families is that they kind of and I get why they want to create their own and incorporate and assimilate the child into their world, but it's really important that the family come into the child's world as well. And so if an older child is adopted, so I've worked with some kids that were adopted at like 8, 9, 10, 11, that were adopted older than when they were older. And they already had some family rituals. They already had some customs, some things that they did in their family. And no matter what those circumstances were. So I've heard some stories of adoptive families where their football team, they were all for the Cowboys. But this child that they're adopting, their family really supported the Commanders. And if y'all don't know, Commanders and Cowboys, like that's like a big, like that's, and because they love this child so much, the family adapts to, like, because we love you so much, we're gonna root for the Commanders. Or like, so coming into that child's world, because often we expect the child to change their name, to change all of these things, and then they don't also make sure as a family, like they're just like, oh, like I give you love, and so you should want to be here, you should want to do all these things, when it's normal for that child to have questions about, I wonder what my life would have been like if my parent hadn't given me up for adoption. Like, so they talk a lot about this child having some fantasies and some of those things. Like that is really, really common. I have some resources linked in the description. So this is adoptionsupport.org. It's the Center for Adoption Support and Education for professionals. They currently, I think they're still accepting new people in Texas, I think. If you're a licensed therapist in Texas, I believe they are still accepting people for their next cohort. But I was able to do this training for free, and it was one of the best. So I had done years and years of trauma and attachment work, but had never had a training on just adoption. And adoption brings some difficulties, some complexities, some things that is different than working in other settings. So there is kinship care. So I work with some people that were adopted by family members. I work with international adoptees. So both the oldest sister and the victim in this case, they're both international adoptees. And then I work with some people that have been adopted through foster care through the DSS system. Okay. And no matter what type, because some people think, oh, if I adopt an infant, they're not going to have any problems. If I adopt a 1 or 2-year-old, so sometimes they're thinking you were in my home long enough that like you that's going to undo all of that early childhood stuff. And that's not always the case. And sometimes you do have to do things different. So there is a phenomenal treatment. Okay. When I say phenomenal, like I cannot speak. So this is one of my favorite things to use with families. There was a free training in my area called Empowered to Connect. It's trust-based relational intervention. Trust-based relational intervention. I'm going to make this bigger, and I have this linked down below as well. And I just want to play one of the videos that describes this. And then I want to play the founder of this program, her talking about food issues, because food issues, is a very, very common one that comes up in adoption. And there is an adoption competent way to handle it. And then there's the Ferriter way, which is not. Nobody recommend 0 out of 10. Like nobody, like what they did. I think so he had to eat breakfast in that room, and they would give him a peanut butter sandwich for breakfast. And he didn't get extra snacks. So he's a growing boy, and the way that they controlled his food, very, very problematic to me. But all right, let's watch this.
TBRI, trust-based relational intervention, has at its core building a trusting relationship. It has 3 sets of principles, and they look at the child as a whole. When you think about development, the baby cries and I say, yes, I will comfort you. And so this child learns that they have a voice. They learn trust, which is the lesson of the first year of life. I can trust. There are so many children from hard places. And for those children, their capacity to trust has been fiercely damaged. The brain chemistry of a child who cries and no one comes is dramatically altered. The child with a history of trauma or loss or abuse has no hope of healing without a nurturing relationship. In every way that I make time and space, that I give touch, eye contact, and I give words, I am going to empower this child to go back to the beginning of what he or she should have experienced in the arms of a loving parent that said, when you cry, I will come. The phenomenal thing about a trust-based intervention is, as we connect to this child, as we build safety, we actually change the brain chemistry. We change the wiring of the brain. This is really the heart and soul of all that we are and all that we do. Do I look into the child's eyes? Do I touch their arm when I talk to them? When they talk to me, do I stop what I'm doing and talk to them? This is the essence of mindfulness. The excitatory chemicals about I'm afraid, I'm hungry, I'm cold, those are balanced when the caregiver comes and gives warmth. All regulation occurs first with an external regulator. So in the beginning, I regulate all. They're cold, I bring warmth. They're crying, I bring myself. And out of my regulation, their brain develops capacity for self-regulation. If this child didn't have this experience, that child doesn't feel safe. This chemistry can be altered, first by knowing they're safe, second by nutrient-rich foods, third by my environmental regulation of that child's emotion, and fourth by appropriate exercise. So we can balance brain chemistry by creating a holistic environment. We clearly have to deal with behavior, correcting.
And she said, felt safety. Felt safety. Safety must be felt. And I believe that that child did not feel safe emotionally, physically. That child did not feel safe in that home. And kids who do not feel safe are going to stay in survival brain. And survival brain, my fight, flight, freeze, that type of high cortisol brain, they are not going to make this because their thinking brain is shut down. And that child was just trying to survive. That child was doing the best that he could, and it was up to the adults to create that safety. And I don't think that happened. And so the training is phenomenal. I love hearing these reminders. So the creator of the program is Dr. Karyn Purvis. It comes out of Texas. There is a heavy, so sometimes there can be so she is a Christian. And often my Christian adoptive parents are some of my hardest to, because sometimes getting them to stop using physical discipline, because there are some Christians that believe if, spare the rod, spoil the child. That's not what it meant. Discipline has to teach. But she is a Christian doctor. Like she's like her whole life was about creating safety for adoptive kids. And her approach is you cannot use that type of punishment with foster adoptive children. You will create harm. And so that's where doing her training, doing the adoption competency, I've been a lot more specific with the recommendations that I give families. And it's given me the language of what to communicate. So the parents that I work with, they desperately want to help. They desperately want to do something different. And I think there's probably more to this story. Like I would assume, and not that it would make it okay, but I would assume that there is some more trauma and stuff back in Tim's history. But and that does not excuse anything. That does not excuse anything. But I've had some people, if they don't deal with their trauma, they can think, oh, I'm doing better. Like my parent, broke bones. My parent did this. And they can think that they're creating safety, and they are not. It's incredibly. And sometimes with Christian parents, I've also seen this blind obedience, do it because I told you. That is not developmental. It's like, oh, it's the whole thing. I want my child to question, but like I teach him how to disagree appropriately. So there's a way to disagree appropriately. I don't want my kid to be a robot, because if something isn't okay, I want him to feel safe to tell me. And so so if you look at the research on physical discipline with children, and they also have research on even physical discipline done in a way that doesn't leave marks and all those things, it can still cause harm. So it puts the kid in fight or flight mode. And often what it does is it connects, don't do it with this person. It doesn't make the person not do it with someone else. And that's what I'm going to say there. All right. So let's finish this one. And then I want to talk about food.
Means showing a child the right behavior, praising him when he gets it, and showing it to him until he can get it right, and showing him with no fear and no shame, so that he builds success, not a greater sense of failure. So the message of hope for our families is that we can help our children to dramatic levels of healing. We simply have to be devoted to it and be willing to invest what it's going to take.
All right. And so let me pause. And so I have this video linked down below if anyone wants to take a look at it. And then for prayer, parent, partner, Eve, servant of God, if you just Google effects of physical discipline, the research will pop right up. There's an article from the World Health Organization. I think I can put it in the chat. There's also new research that says that yelling and screaming, especially in the way that Tim was doing, that sometimes that can cause more harm or similar amounts of harm as as the types of trauma that leaves marks. And so, all right. So I'm not saying that I know. So I don't know if he was, because I don't know that he was. I've seen this generational trauma continue because so we often because I would love to know what Tim's father was like. So that's just the therapist in me. Okay. Like it's the so tell me about your parents. Like it's a therapist thing. In situations that I've worked with like this, I often find that because Tim is so controlled and he's so just regimented, and I would want to know like what caused that. Like he just seems very I would want to know what happened with that. Now let's talk a little bit about food, okay? And because so the victim in this case, he stole he stole all right, so let me go back. So dissertation is on discipline. So my dissertation was also in forgiveness and aggressive children. Physical discipline was one of my constructs, and there's already that research. So if you go into the like, there is that research out there that talks about that. And I did that dissertation 2009, 2008. I did that a long time ago, and that research was out there, and the research is still saying the same thing. Okay. And so I would encourage you to search that out. And I think the article I sent, the article that I linked, they might have resources linked there as well. But yes. All right. So let's talk a little bit more about food, because the child in this case would get in trouble for a lot of different food stuff. And let's share this tab. And food struggles, it is really, really common. And so this is another TBRI, trust-based relational intervention, Empower to Connect. This is some of their videos. It's available on YouTube. I linked it below.
One of the most common battles our parents engage in are food battles. And I just have to say up front, that's probably your least productive way to use your energy. Obviously, our children have to learn to eat well. They're going to learn best by our own model. So am I having a gallon of coffee in the morning? Or am I having something that's more nutritious myself? So I'm going to set an example, number one. Number two, I'm going to keep things in the home that are nutritious and nourishing. And number three, I may work out compromises with my children where there's, okay, let's eat 3 no thank you bites of each thing on your plate, and then we'll have the bowl of fruit. I just simply would ask, most of our children have been hungry. Prenatally, we have children who were malnourished. And postnatally, we have lots of kids who are without food. Finding ways to build trust, build connection, meet their needs, that build trust between us, that we're going to meet that need for food, is first step. And the second step is, don't have a bloodbath over food. This is not the place to exert your will. We have parents who will send the same meal 3 or 4 days in a row to our summer camp and say, until this child eats this, they don't get anything else. I'm not going to put my energy there. I want this child to know I'm going to feed you. Now you're going to need to eat something that's decent, and then we'll have something you really want. But there's not going to ever be, on my watch, a bloodbath over food. Choose your battles. That's not one that you can win and earn trust. Moderate your family's living style, moderate your family's practices, moderate what you have in the home, and make compromises with your child about what they eat at your table. Let them know you're their partner in everything. Food may be the first place to start. Many food battles that I've observed in the dozen years that I've worked exclusively with at-risk children who've come from hard places, many, if not most, of the food battles are driven over either a historical fact or over a sensory issue. Now, Many of our kids' parents will say, well, he's such a picky eater. But that child may have profound sensory processing issues. They may not want anything but an applesauce texture. That could be oral defensiveness. It's tactile. I don't like to touch that. For a child who won't eat certain foods, it may be because the smell is overwhelming to them. Many of our children, remember, if they can't process the sensory data, they can't deal with what's in front of them. And you have to remember that every piece of information that you process at a higher level goes through the sensory channels in the lower parts of your brain before it has any cognitive functioning. And if our kids can't get past the smell or the texture, that's not even a door that's open to figure out. So we may be punishing children for not eating things that induces reactivity or aversion in them. And in doing that, we're losing great levels of trust. I've also had children in our camp who had food identified with traumas. I think of one child who had come to us in protective custody of Child Protective Services in the foster home that was serving her and protecting her at that time, covering her at that time. And that child's foster mom had sent her a particular sandwich. And that little girl had a memory of a terrible trauma that had to do with that sandwich. And my camp buddy was trying to make her eat that sandwich. And I intervened and said, you know what? We don't do that. Now, that little girl is so reactive, she's not able to tell me the story under the gun. But when I pull her aside and say, well, what would sound good to you? It sounds really tasty. We've got some bananas. We've got some nuts. We've got some apples. What would you like the best of all? And she chose something. We took a little walk. She began to tell me the story, and it was a horrifying story. That food was associated with a particular memory for that little girl. I just simply would never choose a food battle as the battle. Here's what you need to remember. Food is about survival. Our kids need to know that all their basic needs are met. No matter what, we're there. They can trust us. They may have to compromise with us because they can't have M&Ms for breakfast. But they might have 4 M&Ms after their scrambled eggs, if that's the way that we begin to initially get that child to eat something healthy without a battle. But simply put, once a child has been hungry or once a child has had issues with food, that part of the brain remains hyper vigilant about those issues for usually the lifespan.
And I just want to say that I have seen that in my work. So one of the most severe cases I saw, as soon as I would pick the individual up, so I did home-based therapy, and I would pick kids up from school sometimes, and then we would meet, or I would take them home, and or like it just worked out schedule wise, where sometimes I would be the one picking them up. But as soon as, and I worked with a particular individual for years, and for those years, as soon as they got in my car, they would say, "What do you have a snack?" And I never forgot a snack. Like in 2 years, there was never not a snack. But every single time, as soon as that person got in my car, they would be like, "Where do you have my snack?" To the point where when we were on the last snack, we would go to the store, and that individual would be able to pick what their next snack would be, and I would keep it in my trunk. Like I kept special snacks just for this individual in my car, and while they were eating that snack, they would be thinking, "I wonder what's for dinner." And probably while they're eating dinner, they're thinking about their next snack. And while they're eating breakfast, they're thinking about lunch. Like this was an individual whose brain was just constantly focused on food. And once that part of the brain is turned on, it's really hard to turn it off. And I once had a foster care worker that had a phenomenal recommendation. We had issues with hoarding food. So hoarding food would be there are wrappers, there's this food that we find in the room. Like food is being stored and hidden in places. And so what we did was we sat down and talked about the fact that it wasn't safe to have food just kind of in these little nooks and corners, and that we could get bugs and, you know, animals. Just we talked about the safety of it, and we gave the individual a small Tupperware container, and they were able to fill that container up with their healthy snacks. And as soon as they needed more snacks for that container, they could take it to the parent, and the parent would put more snacks in it. And just and the individual didn't like gorge on, like, the individual just having their own snacks, their own Tupperware container full of snacks. We immediately stopped. And that won't work for every child. I'll be honest. It won't work for every child. But I have seen having their own little container. We put healthy snacks in it. And so if I do have an issue where a child overeats to the point of getting sick, then maybe they only pick 3 or 4 snacks in there. And then within trust-based relational intervention, they talk about saying yes. So, not that I say yes to everything, but that we have a yes table, so that I have like a bowl of fruit, or I have some healthy snacks where no matter when the child asks, that I'm able to say yes to them, and that they're able to have it. Now, what will automatically happen is right before dinner is ready, that child is going to come and they're going to say, "Can I have an apple?" And like dinner, like the parent is literally about to put dinner on the table. You say, "Yes, go on ahead and grab your apple, put it by your placemat, eat your food first, and then you can have your apple." So I'm saying yes. I'm not saying, because normally what every other parent would want to do in that moment is, you're asking for an apple. Like, I'm about to give you dinner and you want an apple, but just having a yes, being able to tell a child. So the no triggers the survival response. So and so having a yes table, having some publicly available fruits. So what Tim and Tracy did, if they had, so this child had no access to food, no access to water, no access to any, like, the bucket was the bathroom, and even the sister talks about how bad it smelled. And so I saw a question on advice for a child using food for comfort. So even adults use food for comfort, and wants to eat all the time. And sometimes it's about teaching them. So for kids that have been that have went so if there's been significant neglect, some kids truly can't feel when their stomach is full. And so sometimes if occupational therapy is available, and if we are able to look at the sensory needs of the child, there's something called interoception. I think that's how you say it. But there's like the feeling full, or feeling like you have to go to the bathroom. Like, some people, they don't feel their body. Like, there's some people that constantly feel hungry. And then also, I also just like to rule out that there isn't like undiagnosed, diabetes or thyroid, because hyperthyroidism will also cause this like this constant hungriness. So I like to rule out a medical condition as well. And then sometimes kids are going through growth spurts, because good gosh, I know my child can, during the summer, those summer stomachs are something else. And so what we did was, we just had like a bowl of healthy snacks that were available, and our child was able to just come and get those. Sometimes there might be a rule of like, so maybe before you get seconds, so it takes you 20 minutes to feel full. Do you know that? So for an average person, while they're eating, so that's why they tell you to chew slowly and to like wait. Sometimes they tell you to drink water, but sometimes you can feel hungry, but you're actually thirsty. And so, and then talking with a therapist about it, talking and getting some individualized recommendations, I think that can be helpful. All right. And so let me just check the comments. All right. All right. And so, yay, give the yes table a try. Let me know how that goes. It's probably food being comforting. So like, especially like on a cold day, a nice like soup and grilled cheese. So like, as we were, so I had to have snacks to get through this, like this. So that's why before we started, I was like grab your water. I have tea. I have water with a little bit of flavor in it. Like this, you have to take care of yourself. And sometimes with emotions, if I'm sad, I can kind of feed that. If I'm anxious, I can feed that. And sometimes people have like an oral, like where it's just like they just want to be doing something. If the child is old enough for gum, sometimes, but that's where you talk with your medical doctor. I'm not giving you advice, but sometimes the child just wants something. I've had some younger kids where we did like a chew necklace. It was just that chewing sensation gave them comfort, that when they were upset, they really, really loved comfort. And so I acted like I was buying these for my child. I totally bought these for me. And so I'm so glad that this has been helpful. They were trying to, like, snacks are the best. And this kid, he didn't get snacks. Like, that is sad. All right. So we're about to move into some heavy testimony again. So now we're going to move into the prosecution's expert. And so let me just cue that up real quick. And we can, let me see. I think it's this one. Yes, I think it's this one. Yes. All right. So this is a psychiatrist that is testifying. I think after having reviewed records, I did not watch all of the testimony. I watched some clips of it. And so we're just going to play a little bit of this. So this is the prosecution expert talking about the fact of the harm that this type of behavior can do to a child.
From the Ring camera in this case.
I did, yes. I believe I reviewed in the neighborhood of 40 videos.
Now, did you also review some school records related to the child in this case, as well as some prior treatment records by other providers?
Yes, I did.
Now, I wanted to, based on your review of all of the documentation in this case, of the documentation that you reviewed in this case, were you able to reach a professional opinion as to whether or not the treatment that received from his parents in this case was harmful?
Yes, I did. I felt it was severely harmful and very psychologically damaging to.
And why is that?
It was a long-standing pattern of harsh, cruel, and demeaning actions toward this child, as well as close to 3 years of essentially solitary confinement when he was not in school, as well as really sadistic punishments while he was locked away in the room. For instance, withholding meals if he misbehaved, taking his one book away as punishment, which is the one thing he had to do in the room towards the end, turning the lights out to punishment as punishment. And in fact, he talked about being afraid of the dark. And when the lights would go off when he was being punished, he would pull the sheet over his head and really feel terror.
Do you have an opinion as to whether or not this type of treatment of a child by the parents is malicious?
Hi, I'm Zoe Gong. As a traditional Chinese
Commercials.
my recipes.
It's malicious. It's cruel. There's really
Overruled.
You can go ahead. Do you have an opinion as to whether or not this type of treatment is malicious?
Yes, my opinion is it's malicious. It's cruel. I can't think of any other way to describe it more accurately.
Now, even in cases where this punishment may be in response to maybe a negative or unwanted behavior of a child, is that change at all your opinion? If the child did something wrong and then the parent, this is how they are punishing them, does that change your opinion on whether or not this type of action by the defendants is malicious and cruel?
No, there's no set of circumstances concerning a child's behavior that would justify this sort of really torturous behavior.
Would this type of behavior as punishment or as a punitive measure, or would it result in a positive behavior modification by the child?
No, if I just if I was asked that in a theoretical way, I would predict this sort of behavior to cause the child's reactions, the behavior, their psychological state to deteriorate even further.
And what kind of behaviors might you see as a result of that, hypothetically, in a child who is subjected to this type of behavior, this type of treatment?
It could go in a whole lot of directions that we see in children who are abused, children psychologically, emotionally abused, neglected, but it can go from depression to anxiety to self-injury, where they maybe even start cutting themselves, to trying to commit suicide, to aggression, to headbanging, to problems with peers, problems with concentration, nightmares, sleep disturbances. The list is very long in abused children, how different children will manifest the signs of abuse.
Could it result in an increase of the type of behavior that is that the parent considers bad or inappropriate?
Yes, it can cause the child to have a more irritable mood. They can become aggressive with their peers. They can become aggressive with family members. Yes, they can they may often will try to run away.
Now, is there any justification or possibility of a positive result from this type of punishment of a child, this type of treatment?
No.
All right. And so the prosecution's expert, I think, did a really good job. The defense has a bit, because this expert, I guess, said something to the effect of, when children who are treated this way, when they're in a safe environment, often the behaviors decrease. And so the defense wanted to bring up, I guess the behaviors haven't decreased. But I think that goes deeper into just this ongoing maltreatment of this child from when he was very, very young. It does sound like Tim has always been pretty controlling, pretty like the yelling, screaming, demeaning. It sounds like this has been his parenting strategy with this child. And to me, that can cause additional harm. Phoenix had a really great question and wanted me to cover attachment disorders. And that's a great time for me to share a different resource that I have linked below. And so let me share this tab. This is Beacon House. This comes out of the UK, and I really like the resources that they have. They also have, I think this resource could be for anyone talking with children about war and conflict. But it talks about developmental trauma. My issue with, so I would not diagnose this child with an attachment disorder because I don't think he didn't have a secure base. So attachment comes from having a safe, secure base. And if someone doesn't have a safe and secure base, so what the defense expert tries to say is that he had all these behaviors and that they got him kind of this way. And that, but then, so the defense expert kind of turns into the prosecution's expert, like on redirect. Like, well, I believe I have the timestamp for that part, because there was some talk about should he be diagnosed with reactive attachment disorder. My concern with that type of diagnosis for this child is I don't think he had a secure base. And children, we know children that do not have a secure base are going to have an insecure attachment. That so they did this this research with, I think it's called Reese's. I'm bad with saying that correctly, but with monkeys, where they gave the monkey the option to have a wire, like mother that had milk, or to be on a soft comforting one. And they preferred the soft one, even though the wire one had the food. Okay. And so it does not sound like this child, adults were not people that you could go to when you had a problem. They weren't people that created, they didn't even meet basic needs of like a room in the house with everyone else. Because when it's my understanding, when they moved to Florida, they already had that room made for him. There was no room for him in the main house. There was no escape of the box. So it wasn't like this was a punishment for like a week, or this wasn't a punishment for a day. This was this child's life. This child was going to live in this box, and that's just the way it was. And so that's where, yeah, Harlow, thank you. Thank you for adding that part. I'm bad because there's a lot of different research. It's a very, very impactful study because it shows the importance of nurturing warmth, that comfort. Because based on Maslow, you would think that maybe food, that the monkeys would would hang on the wire when for the food. No, that comfort, that nurturing, that was where they went. And so um like I said, so that resource is linked, and it has a lot of different resources and tools for adoption and trauma, and just I've used a lot of these resources with families. I like talking about resilience. So the brain can be rewired if Tim and Tracy had received appropriate training. And every adoption agency has different expectations, has different screening process. And often people want a child so desperately that sometimes they say yes to everything. Like, yes, yes, yes. Like, because it's my understanding that Tracy ended up getting pregnant with their first child shortly after or somewhere around the adoption. And so they had 3 young children, 2 girls and 1 boy. And boys, and so boys just I'm a boy mom. My son is, and so he's probably gonna, about 3 o'clock, he's gonna come and ask for the iPad. And so I'm gonna have that ready for him. But I think that with a different parenting situation, now would this child be perfect? No. Might he still have some issues? Maybe, but I don't think it would have. What they did, I think, made things worse for him. That's my thoughts. Those are my opinions. Let me come back to the chat real quick. Okay, good. So, with so I don't think, so he wasn't in any treatment. Did we talk about that yet? I don't think we got there yet. The fact that the last time he was in treatment was 2019. And so before that, he was in therapy. Before that, he had been diagnosed with ADHD at one point. I'm careful because in kids, trauma can look like ADHD. I have a video here about trauma and ADHD, and kind of the differences, how they overlap, and how they can intersect, and how, as a psychologist, how I kind of parse out which might be going on. Not that if, but just, am I seeing more the difficulty concentrating that's coming from the amygdala? Is it more the emotional part of the brain that's shutting down the thinking brain? Or is it ADHD, an underdeveloped prefrontal cortex? Trauma impacts the brain. So being talked to that way, like all these things happening, it makes, so in survival mode, the brain doesn't care about like, and I think he did decent in school. I think school might have been an escape, but some kids in situations like this, it can lower things like IQ, which I think the expert talked about. In this case, it might not have. It sounds like he likes electronics. He likes, and I think he did have some pretty concerning searches, but the way he was being, I mean, he was being treated like a hostage. Like, I can't think of any, like, he was being treated so poorly. Not that justifies any, but like, I don't think anyone knew that was assessing him how bad things were, which is, I think, what one of the experts talks about, of why they questioned the diagnosis of any type of attachment disorder. I should have pressed share this tab instead, and instead I closed it. And so just give me a moment to share. Here we go. So I want to get to the prosecution expert who I disagree with her on some things, and then I agree with her at the end. So this is a person, she's a forensic psychologist. The last person was a psychiatrist. This is the forensic psychologist that pretty much comes in and talks about the fact that that with this individual, that it was his early childhood trauma that caused the parents to parent him in this way. And while that decision was wrong, like, I don't know, I think she was trying to say that the parents didn't intend. I don't know. Y'all tell me what y'all thought. I don't know, but she does turn the testimony becomes less helpful for the defense on redirect. So let's go.
Your opinion that the results that had come from early childhood neglect?
I'm sorry, say that one more time.
Sure. The results that we're seeing on the neuropsychological test, is it your opinion that those resulted from early childhood neglect?
Yes, that is my opinion.
Why is that your opinion?
I feel like that the early childhood neglect that we see in him from, being in a foreign orphanage and from the records that I reviewed from that orphanage show, not only did he have severe neglect and it was malnourished, they were feeding the children sugar water in one of the records, and there was a very high infant to caretaker ratio, so that caretakers can't take care of all these babies that are in the orphanage, so they didn't get their needs met. He also had scabies on his body that were not treated medically. So this is a child that was severely neglected. We have no idea what happened to him the first 7 months of life before he was put on the orphanage door. We have no idea the neglect or the abuse. But I think that when you see that type of neglect, there is definite brain reaction from that. There's no way that you can have a child that is being neglected. And really, if you think about being ignored or the scabies, like even medically neglected and abused, that would not have some kind of brain fallout because of that.
To state the obvious, is that prior to the Ferriters adopting him?
Yes.
When was this neuropsychological test conducted? If you have it on there.
I will look. October of 2022.
Is the fact that if it was after January 28th, 2022, change your opinion about the fact that this has to do with early childhood neglect for him?
No.
Why not?
I mean, I feel like if this testing had been done, even 2 years before, we probably would have seen a very, very similar pattern. We probably would have even seen a similar pattern when he was younger, because we can tell through the records that this is impulse control, self-monitoring, emotional regulation. These were things he consistently had problems with across all settings.
I just can't do this anymore.
Sorry, y'all. Commercial. All right.
Is there any evidence in the records that any of the physicians or psychiatrists or social workers that the Ferriters went to recommended a neuropsychological evaluation?
No, I never saw that recommendation.
I now want to talk about another opinion in this case. Do you have any opinions about whether or not it has symptoms that are indicative of an attachment disorder?
Yes.
What's your opinion?
I do believe that his symptoms are an indicative of an attachment disorder.
Why?
So first of all, I see reactive attachment disorder was diagnosed in the records for him, starting as early as I believe he was 7 or 8. I don't know that at 7 or 8 they had fully diagnosed it, but the therapist was telling the parents, hey, I think this is more than what I thought it was, and I think I think it might be reactive attachment disorder. And then it was more formally diagnosed by a psychiatrist a couple of years after that. So I not only see it in the records, but also in terms of the behaviors that we were seeing and through the records, point to a child that's having problems with attachment and pretty significant behaviors because of it.
So let me stop you there because I want to understand what an attachment disorder is. So what's attachment?
Well, attachment is the most fundamental, basic thing that children need in order to be successful in life, in order to make friends, have intimate partners, being good at their job. Being able to attach to people means that you have stability, you have empathy because you can understand what someone else is feeling, not just yourself. It also helps you establish trust so that you can have a relationship where you can be independent and someone can trust you and you can trust them that they're going to meet your needs if you need it. When children early on don't get that, there's a whole disruption that happens that affects every part of their life because.
So I agree with her that early child, like that what happens in those early years is really important. And that's why I said earlier, even if the parents had provided, attachment and adoption informed, like he still might have had some struggles and issues, but I don't think they gave his brain a chance to calm. I don't think he felt safe. So the other psychiatrist, the prosecution expert, talked about like the child like just seeming afraid of the dad. And so I get what she's saying. So I guess after they were arrested, that was when they got the neuropsychological, I believe. So this neuropsychological that diagnosed an attachment issue. That's the one that was done after there was legal involvement. That's my understanding. Correct? Excuse me. Correct me if I'm wrong.
Because we're social creatures, and if you're not able to trust people and navigate life socially, then there's a problem and it leads to what we call a disorder.
When is attachment developed in a person?
A lot of attachment issues have been looked at, of course, in my field, because it is such an important issue and a lot of things hinge on your ability to attach in a healthy way. Normally what we see is there's a cycle of attachment from the moment that child is born. So what we see in the cycle is a child that is born, and let's say that child is wet or soiled or hungry or cold. That child starts crying. Immediately an adult comes, a caretaker comes, picks up that child, takes care of that child, soothes that child. The child's then able to self-regulate, go back to sleep, or whatever they're doing. This cycle occurs thousands of times with parents. If you've ever had a newborn, it's constant. And if you're constantly going after that newborn every time they cry, soothing that newborn, helping that newborn then learns, I have someone I can trust, I have someone I can attach to, and I know that if I get out of control or I need something, there's an adult that's going to come along and that adult is going to help me. Children that do not get this, there's an interruption in that attachment. So you can imagine all the things. They don't trust that anyone will ever take care of them. They don't trust that their needs will be met. They can't see the world from anyone else's perspective. So
that's why it's so important that the parents meet those needs. But okay.
So attachment is a huge thing.
When we talk about attachment, I mean, what separates attachment disorder from a kid that's just like kind of awkward? Like, because it sounds like it's something that affects the personality, but is it just that you kind of end up being like uncomfortable or awkward, or are there other behaviors associated with having an attachment disorder?
When you have a disorder in general, so I'll talk in general first. When you have a disorder, a lot of people, you'll hear people say, oh my gosh, I've got bipolar, I'm so moody, or, oh, that kid's got ADHD, he's so hyper. It's not just something that's at the level that we normally see in life. It's at a level that we think that it is clinically significant, and it's a disorder. It's disrupting their life. It's disrupting the lives of people around them. So just because the nature of the disorder means that this is something that's hugely problematic, not just to the person that has it, but to the other people that are around that person. And in terms of attachment disorder in particular, what we normally see. So normally you'll get a child that has a reactive attachment disorder. They come out of a very bad environment. They go into a home that's loving and kind and has stability and structure. We normally see that the child begins to get better. So the attachment disorder gets better. There are children who have what we call persistent reactive attachment disorder, where the damage was so severe in childhood that as they get older, we don't necessarily see that damage start to go away. If they're plugged into the right therapies and they know the right places to go, and some of them, have to go to higher levels of care, then we might see some sort of healing, but it's something that they will struggle with, for some of these kids, for their life.
What behaviors are associated with reactive attachment disorder?
Overruled.
Go ahead. What behaviors are associated with reactive attachment disorder?
So when you look at, so when we diagnose, as psychologists, as psychiatrists, anyone in the mental health field, we have to use the Diagnostic and Statistical Manual. So this tells us what signs and symptoms to look for and how to diagnose. So if you're going to look up reactive attachment disorder in the DSM, you're going to just find pretty much a general way of looking at symptoms. So it will be that the child cannot be soothed by their caretaker. The caretaker tries when the child is out of control to soothe them, and the child wants none of it and continues to tantrum. Or the child doesn't go to that caretaker for the caretaker to take care of them. Most children, when they get hurt, run to their parent. No, these children do not. They kind of keep the parent away. So there's kind of a general way of describing reactive attachment disorder when you see it in your practice. However, when you start to look at when people are studying this issue, what you will see is that there are certain behaviors that are kind of indicative of a kid that has reactive attachment disorder. And it would include lying, frequent lying for no good reason, just lies that make no sense. It can be aggression, it can be violence, it can be being mean to animals, being mean to younger children, stealing, hoarding. Food is a big issue for children with reactive attachment disorder. So they gorge on food or they steal food. They're constantly food preoccupied. Some of them don't eat. So it really just depends on, how that is manifesting in each individual child. But it's a significant psychological disorder when you see the symptoms involved of children whose reactive attachment disorder did not get better just because they were put in a loving home.
What, in coming to your opinion that has behaviors indicative of attachment disorder, what are you relying on? Or can you explain to us how you came to that opinion?
Yeah, so there's multiple records that talk about the behaviors that the family was seeing and dealing with in the home, from psychiatrists, from a treatment provider in 2015, all the way up. All the way up to now, we see these behaviors. So it was pretty well documented that the behaviors that were being seen were indicative of a reactive attachment disorder. The lying, the stealing, especially the food issues, just almost everything. Cruelty to animals or being mean to animals. I'm not going to say cruel like horrible, but being mean to animals, being mean to younger, more vulnerable children. These types of things we do see in his history.
And does that predate, let's say, about May of 2018?
The very first record I saw where the family was really describing the behaviors that they were dealing with was 2015. So I believe he was 7 or 8 at that time.
You talked a little bit about gorging being common for children with attachment disorder. Can you sort of take us through what happens and why that happens?
Well, I think it's easy to understand. If you are starving as an infant and nobody is feeding you, then your brain has learned that you can be hungry and you're not going to get taken care of. You're not going to get fed. So it becomes a preoccupation with food, a preoccupation on how do I get food? And when I do get food, I want to eat every single thing that I can eat immediately. Or I'm going to hoard food. I'm going to hide food in my room. I'm going to hide food in my backpack so that I'll always have food. It's really very sad because it really is from a brain that was so deprived of basic needs. And now even, into childhood, they're still struggling with that kind of stuff. And we see that with a lot of food centric ideas and wanting to get a hold of food, and not having any kind of breaks on food when he does get a hold of something sweet, to the point of even stealing food.
Is that sort of gorging of food and hoarding of food? I mean, is that healthy for a child? Should a parent allow that to continue to happen?
No, you wouldn't allow a child to gorge on food.
Is there any indication in the record that the Ferriters were educated by a psychiatrist or a medical professional about how to handle this gorging issue in a meaningful way?
Sustain. You can rephrase, Ms. Marone.
Sure. Do you have any opinion, and we'll talk about this more in detail, as to whether the Ferriters acted with malice?
Do I have an opinion? Yes.
Okay, what's that opinion?
I do not think that they were maliciously trying to harm their child and make things worse.
I want to talk about that in more detail in a little bit, but as it relates to the food, why do you think that?
Well, I don't understand.
Sure. So I want to talk about your opinion regarding them not having malice and what they did, but as it relates to and how much he was permitted to eat, what is your opinion about that? And
Okay, so I just saw one of the most phenomenal questions because, okay, so there are people that it is their culture that you have to ask for food at home. So if you want a snack, that you have to ask for it. So like earlier today, my son, he grabbed a granola bar. Just and it wasn't, I didn't have it on the table. Like he went to the pantry and he grabbed a granola bar. I don't consider that stealing food. I don't like, that's not my concept of like, so to me, my concept of my child stealing food would be us going to the store and him taking something from the store without us paying for it. That would be, or him going to school and him going into another child's lunchbox and taking something from another child and doing that. There are people that it is their culture that you have to ask for food at home. And if you do not ask for the food, so the sister talked about that a little bit, that I don't think she didn't have to ask for a snack, but this child did. Okay. So she was able to get, if she was hungry, she was able to get a snack. But if he was hungry, he had to ask and then hope that maybe, so that's why that yes table, that anytime you're hungry, you always get yes, you are going to get food. Okay. So like this was important. Like there are families. So that's not my, but I can't tell you the number of foster families, the number. And there was one particular case where someone put a Snickers bar in the refrigerator on purpose to test the child. And this was a foster child. Like this was a child who had been through horrific traumas. And so the kid ate and the person was so mad that the kid ate the Snickers bar. And it was just like, so I have food that I know my kid really likes, but it's not as healthy. So I keep it up top because he would he would eat it all. So the food that I'm concerned about, I keep it outside of his reach. I don't keep it locked. There are families that lock pantries, that lock food away. I personally don't have, like, we don't have a concern where we have to do that. But okay, I hope that helps, because that's a real thing. And so I don't see it as, but there are people that if you don't ask for food, like before you get it, so that's why having a yes table, like, okay, what's food that the child doesn't have to ask for? Or like, if they ask, the answer is always going to be yes. Like if that's y'all's family rule. Okay. I hope that helps. Let's keep going with her testimony. And I'm going to skip ahead and a little bit once she gets through this part.
in the fact that they were not acting maliciously.
Oh, okay. So I think that not only in his deposition, but also in the deposition of his sister, they do talk about that the mother was very health conscious, that the mother didn't want the children having sugary.
Okay, I'll keep it going, but sometimes like a parent controlling food, like it can be that reminds me of like the Ruby, Frankie, Jody Hildebrandt control of food. Like it gives me bad vibes. That's just me personally.
Snacks. They mentioned the snacks that she allowed them to have. And forgive me if I'm wrong, but it was stuff like granola and yogurt and bananas and things like that. The sister testified in her.
Sustained.
Without stating exactly what said, can you just talk more generally about your opinion?
Sure.
Thank you.
Sure. So I believe that the mother was trying very hard to make sure that didn't get too much sugar.
Sustained.
What is your in determining? So I guess not speaking about your beliefs, but what the records actually show. What efforts were made by the Ferriters that makes you believe that it was not malicious?
Overruled, but the witness is instructed not.
All right. So I think I have some therapists here. Hey, if you're a therapist, welcome, welcome. So something that I do with the families that I'm working with is we try to reframe the language. So I will talk. So because if I think my child is stealing food, so if someone is stealing from me, that is going to be more triggering than if my child is hoarding food or if they're taking food without permission. Or so the language that we use is really important. And so when I'm working with a family, I will try to have them get away from the stealing food. So in this case, I think he did take sprinkles from the teacher at school. So my child, like raised in, so my birth child, like mom and dad still together, like my birth child, he took something from the teacher. Like he took a little like cube that he wanted, I think in kindergarten. He took a little something from school. The other day he came home with a little ladybug and he said a friend gave it to him. There was a part of my of my mind that was like, did he take that without I don't know. I don't. He took it back to school and he didn't have it the next day. So I don't know what happened. But the idea that someone is stealing something from you, that is going to bring up more emotions versus hoarding, taking without permission. So I do try to get people to change their language around those things. That's what I do. All right, let's keep it going.
Not to relate what anyone said to you, just what you reviewed and what drives your opinion.
You're on a Carnival cruise, and for years, that's
commercial.
According to the records, a pediatrician told mom not to give.
Sustained.
Do you have any belief? Is it your opinion that the Ferriters were withholding food from him intentionally to harm him?
No.
Is it your opinion that it is related to the fact that he was hoarding food as a result of his earlier condition?
I think it was also about control, but that's just me.
Overruled as to that. You can answer, ma'am.
Go ahead. Yes. Okay. How are children with attachment perceived by adults who are not their parents?
That's a good question.
Can you restate that question again?
Sure. How are children with attachment perceived by adults who are not their parents?
Sometimes they're perceived well. Sometimes that's true.
Sustained.
Sometimes they're good for people that
approach on this stretch.
They do a lot of approaching on stuff. So let me fast forward through some of this. Let's get to the part where she kind of talks about. So her testimony is that she believes that he has complex PTSD. Complex PTSD is not in the DSM-5, but it is something that we understand and we know. So PTSD, the way that it is in our DSM, it was developed more for like war trauma, for like one event versus complex PTSD is like developmental. It happens over time. It's not just one thing. It's a series of things. And she also thought that he had some type of disordered attachment, possibly reactive attachment disorder. Let me get to 243. 243. All right, let's get there. All right, so we're going to keep going from here.
Realization of that type of treatment for the child.
So this is the prosecution, their cross-examination of her. Okay. And the prosecution, they come strong. Okay. Like they're Okay, I'll keep going.
Some people do EMDR with children.
Yes.
And the focus is not on the behaviors when treating PTSD, but what's underlying those behaviors in terms of abuse and neglect, correct?
Exactly.
It would not be appropriate to confine a child to a room with PTSD as was done in this case, correct?
Correct.
That would never be appropriate, correct?
Correct.
Reacting to a child who has complex PTSD or an attachment disorder with things like anger and threats is not productive or helpful to a child with those conditions, correct?
Right.
And those reactions create a psychological harm to the child, correct?
So I have to pause it because at first, this expert, I was a little frustrated with her until the cross-examination, and she wasn't like some of the other experts that I've covered where they were so stuck on their perspective and presenting a particular side that they weren't neutral, that they wouldn't agree to this basic thing. And so like these are really good questions, and she is giving a really professional answer that no, like this was not okay. Yes, this couldn't, that their treatment of him could have made things worse. And I think this makes the defense's case the prosecution's case stronger. So this testimony to me makes the prosecution's case. And this is the defense expert. The defense called her.
Correct.
Yes, and it can exacerbate problems that were already there for sure.
Adding to the existing harm.
Yes.
Making it worse. I see you nodding. We just have to say
Yes.
out loud. Yes. So PTSD can be worsened by ongoing abuse and neglect, correct?
Yes.
In fact, you would agree that there would have been damage done to the victim's neuropsychological health from the defendant's actions in this case, correct?
Yes, most likely.
It's your opinion that the way that his parents handled the symptoms from PTSD exacerbated it, correct?
I do believe that.
And this is not a way that a child with early childhood neglect should be parented, correct?
That's right.
Not only was it harmful, but none of the ways in which they addressed him.
So to me, the defense, I hope they knew. I hope she brought up to them, because if somebody was paying me to come and talk on this, it's like, oh, wow, this case, I was like, okay, so I do think this. And then also, but if I'm asked this, I have to answer honestly. And while I don't think they were doing this maliciously, like I don't think there was, if that was my opinion, I didn't interview him, like I can't talk about his intent. But if I was going to give testimony like this, they would have to know like, hey, I have to give both sides. And so I hope, but things turned out the way I think they should have. But all right, let's go.
Or he was treated would be useful as constructive punishment, correct?
Right. No.
Now, I think that you also said when we spoke previously that there were some indicators that the child was experiencing some symptoms of depression prior to the removal from his parents.
Sustained. Next question.
Let's talk about abuse and neglect generally. Over the course of your career, have you come across cases where there was ongoing abuse and neglect, but the abuse and neglect wasn't apparent to others who interacted with the family?
Say that last part again. I'm sorry.
Have you come across cases of abuse and neglect, ongoing abuse and neglect, where that ongoing abuse and neglect wasn't apparent to people that interacted with the family?
Oh, wasn't apparent. Yes.
Sustain. You want to approach? You can.
So right now, I think the prosecution is worried, like, is she going to ask, like, is the prosecution going to ask if this expert thinks that what they did was abuse and neglect? Like, I think they I don't know what conversation they had, but because I think that was the train of thought that she was going on. So let's go ahead and skip ahead.
November of 2021, correct? Based
Correct.
on the information that you had.
Correct.
Transcendental meditation's not a medical doctor.
I'm just going to fill in the blanks. So the family was looking into like some type of transcendental meditation or something, which meditation might have been nice. I would have, if this child was having this level of issue and problems, and if they were so concerned about safety, I would have wanted him to have been in some type of treatment. I think the parents likely thought that this individual was beyond treatment and was beyond help, but then you don't lock them in a room. So somebody asked that question, I think, in me talking about this case. So to me, this child's behaviors didn't rise to the level of residential care. I think this family was overwhelmed with the number of children that they had and the number of needs. And I think it was easier to just lock him in the room. And now I don't have to worry about if he's getting into stuff. I don't have to worry about if he's lying about stuff. I don't have to worry about any of those things. Like, I think this was about control, because what type of, thank goodness people found this out, because what if that child had been in that situation until they were 18 and legally able to leave? This, like, they wouldn't know how to function. Like, nobody should be locked in a room for that period of time. And this had happened over a period of at least 4 years, and there was no break. And so I think that's why the prosecution, they were talking about the fact that this punishment, it didn't have an end. There was no plan for this child to ever come back into the home. There wasn't a plan for this child to be like, with the I don't, from the way the prosecution talked about it. And but the defense didn't really object. Like, I think the defense maybe showed, oh, he did go to dinner with the family sometimes, or he did do this, or he did do that. So yes, they did allow him out, but like, they kept him so confined. I am glad that he's able to get help and treatment now, but I do have concerns that he might think that there's something wrong with him. He might think that I shouldn't have run away. So I've worked with kids like this, and there was a lot of guilt. There was a lot of guilt of, I'm the reason why my family kind of fell apart, or I'm the reason why this or that. And all right, let's keep going.
A psychiatrist,
No,
a psychologist, a licensed clinical social worker.
I'm not sure who can do it, but I don't believe it is in the mental health field.
And based on the information provided to you, there were no counselors after that date either. He wasn't continuing to see a therapist or a mental health counselor or a licensed clinical social worker after mid 2019, correct?
Correct.
And based on the information provided to you, that he started being held in the structure in early 2019, correct?
Yes.
And there also was no indication that an individualized education plan was ever sought at his school.
Right. I believe he was in private schools, no? But
So-
no, they did not.
Yeah, so there was no individual education
Right.
plan. And then when he came to Independence Middle in Jupiter, when they moved in December of 2021, January of 2022, there was no IEP sought, correct?
Right. I don't think that, I mean, they had just gotten there, and I believe it was over Christmas time. So I don't know that they would have been getting it that quickly, but no, I didn't see evidence of it being sought.
Did you see that they reported no behavioral problems when they enrolled him in to Independence Middle School in Jupiter?
So I have thoughts on this one. So I think they likely told, so sometimes, so schools can refuse to accept kids that have significant behavior problems. Okay. So if that enrollment document, I don't know if that came up, but if that's true, if in his enrollment to Jupiter Middle, or I'm sorry, not Independence Middle, if they checked he had no behavior problems, that was about him not getting denied into that school. Okay. Let's keep it going.
I don't recall that, but I'll take your word for it.
Now, I want to talk about the impacts this type of treatment would have on a child. I think you've already said that it would exacerbate any pre-existing problems that the child may have, correct?
What would
the type of treatment, the way that he was kept and confined, correct?
Oh, yes.
Would it also, and isn't it true that it's your opinion that it will also make the child feel rejected, correct?
Yes, it could.
It make the child feel like they're not good enough, correct?
Yes, it could.
It make the child feel like they are inherently bad, correct?
Yes, it could.
It can lead the child to maneuver or manipulate through a situation to avoid that isolation.
Yes, it could.
It can lead to depression, correct?
Yes,
It can lead to suicidal ideation, correct?
it could.
When a punishment is chronic, meaning that it happens on an ongoing basis, you will see a bigger impact too, correct?
For sure.
And as to the victim in this case specifically, you think that what was going on with him, the issues that he was having prior, was really exacerbated by how his parents acted towards them, correct?
Yes, that's my belief.
There is a psychological impact, a negative one, when punishment is humiliating and isolating, correct?
Yes.
Now, as to the appropriateness of the punishment, it's your opinion that you don't think anything that they did or attempted to do that they did would help him be better, correct?
Sustained.
Isn't it true that it is not appropriate to punish bad behavior by placing a child in a situation where they don't have access to an ordinary bathroom?
Yes.
It's your opinion that should never have been done in this case, correct?
Yes.
That type of treatment is also humiliating, correct?
Yes.
The same is true for locking him from the outside. That is something that should never have been done, correct?
I agree.
That's also true for the inability to control the lights. That is inappropriate, correct? Inappropriate. That is going to have a negative impact on a child if it happens over a longer period of time, correct?
Yes.
Having a child sit in the dark in a locked room for long periods of time is not an acceptable form of punishment.
Sustained.
It is the type of thing that would cause harm, correct? That wasn't.
Sustained.
At no point is there any indication that these parents were advised to engage in this type of behavior, correct?
I didn't see any professional telling them to do that.
And that's because it would be something that would not be recommended by someone within the mainstream psychological and psychiatric community.
Yes, I'm glad you said mainstream, because absolutely there are many professionals that believe in a very militaristic type of parenting, authoritative type of parenting, strip everything out but their mattress, take their door off the hinges. There are professionals and paraprofessionals that do believe this is a way to parent, but people that are mainstream and that really know the research would never have suggested that.
Right. And there's no indication that even these non-mainstream people are involved here and said that you should do this, correct?
Right. I would not know that. Right.
The only advice that we know about is medication and therapy, correct?
That's correct.
That's all the questions I have.
All right, redirect, Ms. Moreau.
Wow. And so I don't know that I hope the defense was prepared to know that, like, there's no therapist that's going to get on the stand and say that what they did was okay. That is within that mainstream. So for the end, there are these, like, so I don't believe in those, like, rebirthing where, like, to form an attachment with the adoptive parent that, like, they, like, rebirth the 14, like, I don't know, like, those, that's kind of weird. That child has a, like, a family. Oh, I think my camera moved. Y'all can see my ring light. Y'all can see my little setup here. I get distracted easily. And my light's broken too. All right. So we're just going to try to keep that off. Okay. But there are people that do believe that this type of but thank goodness there's no person that recommended it, because they would be losing their license. But, like, it was not okay. It was not okay for anyone to do this. Someone mentioned, I think Melissa, I think this was a good point. So I agree with you. I think the parents in their own way did love this child and think they were doing their best for their family. And there are situations where adoptive parents relinquish custody. So they don't feel like they can, and that's extremely for the adoptive child, because that's another kind of attachment disruption. So that can be really disruptive. There are Facebook groups that for rehoming, like, you shouldn't rehome a child. Like, it's like I've heard horror stories about situations like this. I have worked with families that have either made the decision to, there were safety issues, and we did need to look at so home-based therapy is an option in my state. Often before we get to residential, I try to do intensive home-based therapy. There is a particular type of therapy, multi-systemic, I think it's MST, multi-systemic therapy, I think, but it's MST. That's a type of intensive family therapy. It's very like structured and it can be helpful. Um, for trauma and attachment, I prefer the trust based relational intervention that I covered a little bit earlier, the TBRI. And like I said, all these resources are linked down below. I will only put y'all through hearing about these things if I can teach, if I can say something that's helpful, if I can say something that's like, hey, if you are a foster family, if you are a family that's struggling, here are some ways to help and support a child. Like these are some helpful tips. These are where you can find an adoption competent therapist. So not every therapist is trained in how to work with adoption because adoption brings its own thing. My hypothesis and my kind of speculation, I don't know that this is true. I think they were likely more upset when he harmed their birth children. And often families that try to say, "Oh, we treat everyone the same. Oh, there's no difference." I'm like, and even the oldest adopted sister, she felt she was treated better than him. And but sometimes a person, a family, they think, "Oh, we're not capable, we're not able to have children." And then they adopt, and then, "Oh, wow, we end up having our own birth child." And then sometimes the dynamics in that family change, and not in a good way. Changes in kind of a bad way. And foster and adoptive children, they are going to need more support. And I've worked with some birth children that were raised with adoptive, like where they were and they kind of felt jealous or frustrated or upset because maybe the adopted child had so many needs and needed so much, and that birth child felt that they like couldn't get a part of their family before parents do decide to adopt. And if they do have birth children, if they do have children in the home, you need to have hard conversations. Seek out an adoption competent therapist. Like really see and then really think about, so how would I feel if, because I think often people think about the best case scenario and they never consider, what if this child has significant needs? What if they need therapy 3 times a week? What if they need, like, what if this becomes like, do we have the capacity to do this? Because you really, really have to. And there are things that I can say to my birth child that I can never, and I wouldn't say it to him anyway, but you can never ever tell an adopted child, "I'm going to send you back. If you don't get it together, like you're going to have to live somewhere else." You can, unless, so what I tell the families I work with, if you really feel that way, we need to work in the background on that process to have something in place, because when you say that, in my experience, things always get worse. If they get better, it's better for like a week or it does not last, because that triggers that attachment trauma and that child loses hope. I hope that helps. Ladybug, welcome, welcome. Yes, I'm talking about that case out of Jupiter and Ladybug. So we talked about some of the money. It is even the nonprofit, there is some like there's, and so I am not a person that is against adoption. I am for, when you do adopt, if there can be a relationship maintained with the adoptive family. I've worked with adoptees that were unable to get their original birth records. They were unable because like there was some law, I don't know, like for some reason their records were so sealed that they weren't even able to get those records. I've worked with adoptees that have went through the process to find birth family, and that can have its ups and downs because sometimes there can be that can go lots of different ways. Finding birth family can bring up a lot for them because sometimes when they make the decision, especially with a closed adoption, sometimes it can bring up a lot. And then for people that that were adopted through the foster care system or different systems like that, I always just monitor safety through those situations, but it is, wow. This case was hard. This case was tough. If you're here from the beginning, welcome. Thank you. Thank you. There have been like, I think over 400 of you in and out throughout the stream. Drink your water, like take care of yourself. This was a tough one. Let me know if y'all have any final thoughts. If not, like we're going to go enjoy the rest of our Saturday because sometimes they're so I've worked with some phenomenal, amazing foster and adoptive families, and then I've worked with some very concerning situations. And with those phenomenal, amazing situations, what happened is they had already dealt with they were dealing with their stuff because sometimes the adopted child might trigger. So that parent had their own trauma, they had their own stuff, and sometimes that child might be triggering something, and so that adult needed their own therapy. So I've been the therapist for some adoptive parents. And so I work across the kinship network, the adoption kinship network. I work with a little bit of everybody because that everybody across the whole spectrum can have different triggers of loss and grief and just control and identity, and all of these different things come up. Aw. Ladybug, I thank you. I support adoptees. As an adoptee, I can tell you private domestic adoption agencies charge more. Yep, I know. Yep. And so sometimes people will intentionally adopt from a marginalized group because they're not able to afford, and that would have been their preference if they could have. Which so if you do a transracial adoption, it's really important to include them in their culture. Ladybug, I hope you heard me say that earlier. If not, welcome. But making sure that that child is a part of their culture. I've worked with situations, so y'all know y'all have screens. I have had people that have specifically found me as a therapist because their child is African American and the family was not, and they wanted to have supportive, safe people in their child's life because maybe their child had negative experiences with people from their own race. Or I've seen situations where children were afraid of people like within their own race, and it's important for the family to acknowledge their privilege. I saw a really great video in my training where a Black woman had adopted a Caucasian European American boy, and she was like, I can't teach him how to be white. Like I can't. Like I have to, like I don't know what that means. I don't know what it is to have that type of privilege. And she was really made sure that like he felt supported and he was and sometimes that's because normally what happens is the other way around where you really want to make sure so things are not colorblind. I might lose some of y'all for that. So I lost some people for my LGBTQ video. I lost about 4 people. That's all right. So I am really passionate about because I saw a story of a Black boy that was adopted by a white family and he was pulled over. And the family didn't know you have to have that conversation. Like they had like they didn't know like you have to have a conversation of how to manage yourself if you're pulled over, and that child isn't here, and that family fought now to for rights and like the importance of training, the importance of all of these things, and we live in a racialized world. And even if I try to live colorblind, like if other people do not, there are people. So I have a very tall Black boy that around the time he's 8 or 9, I'm gonna have to start having more difficult conversations. We already have some difficult, but like we're gonna have to really start because around that age, research shows that Black boys are often viewed as older and adults and more threatening. So before the age of like 11, but my kid is really tall. He's in the 99th percentile. So I know that that's going to come a few years early for him. And so having these difficult conversations are really important. Aww. Yes, yes. Welcome. Well, it is the light because I have that the light. It looks good, and y'all can kind of see it. Y'all kind of know my setup. So I have this light, and I have a light over here. Sometimes my camera moves around with me. Ooh, before I go, let me tell y'all, because I have a chapter on adoption in my Turning Crisis into Clarity, How to Survive or Thrive in the Midst of Uncertainty on Amazon, Kindle, paperback, and audiobook. And I recorded the audiobook myself. But what chapter is it? It's not a chapter. I think it's just a section on, it might only be a few pages, but I talk about adoption. Yep, it's page 17. If anybody has the book, that light's going to mess that up. But I talk about myths about adoption and truths about adoption. I think I have a longer video here, and then also have some resources for adoption in there as well. Y'all, all right. I'm gonna go put the laundry in the dryer, and I hope y'all enjoy the rest of your day. All right. Y'all have a good one. Bye.